Just marked 30 years since the National Peace Accord was signed on the 14th of September 1991. Political, religious, civil society and business leaders participated in that process, and that paved the way for a relatively peaceful transition to democracy. Joining me now to unpack the significance of this signing is Transformation Initiative Director and the former National Party Cabinet Minister, Roelf Meyer. Mr. Meyer, thank you so much for making time. The 14th of September marking 30 years since the various political parties signed this National Peace Accord that helped us pave the way for a relatively peaceful transition to democracy. Just remind us of what was happening at the time, because it was a build-up to the moment, right? And there was just a lot of political violence in the build-up to that moment and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Clement. In the period that followed the release of President Mandela from prison after 27 years and the unbanning of the ANC and other liberation movements, we saw a lot of political violence that erupted in the country, a lot of political contestation that flowed over into violent unrest. And for about 18 months, neither the political leaders or others could get this under control. There were various allegations of who were behind the violence, etc., but nobody could actually help to control it. And then came Archbishop Tutu and other religious leaders and business leaders, including the late Mr. John Hall and others, and they led us into a process that evolved over a period of 3 months in which we negotiated the National Peace Accord. And I think that was, in a certain way, the first time that we really negotiated in South Africa, because it was inclusive. All political parties were represented, organized labor was represented, business, civil society, like I said, the religious community. So it was a very significant period for us. That was between June of 91 and September when, as you said, the agreement was signed.
Yeah, and it looks like it was also an inclusive process. Clearly, it was quite significant to get everyone to agree on that accord. What do you think was avoided? What could have happened?
Well, you know, it's hard to say, but we were on the way towards a racial conflict in South Africa of a very violent nature. We could have seen a racial war in South Africa, and through calm and dedicated leadership, we were brought together. And like I said, we had a very inclusive process that followed. And I think there's a lot of messages that we can take on board even today as far as that is. So dialogue was the key instrument. We agreed to sit down. We started to talk to each other. And then we were helped by people from outside of the political arena to come and give guidance as far as that is. And I think that in itself, you know, it reminds one of what is the effect, what is the power when people actually decide to work together on an inclusive basis.
Yeah. Looking back at that moment, Mr. Meyer, the commitments that were made, would you say South Africa today is what you had envisaged when the different political players were signing that peace accord?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. You know, you're putting me on the spot. But what we had achieved through, of course, the National Peace Accord was to create space and relative stability through which the constitutional negotiations could start, which actually happened within the months that followed. That was in October of 91. We started to get together, to put together the mechanisms that led to CODESA, as it became known. And of course, that eventually evolved into the interim constitution and the final constitution that was only signed at the end of 1996 by President Mandela. So the question that you're asking, I think, relates to this whole process, which lasted for years. Peace Accord, interim constitution and final constitution that so many South Africans participated in. I think we can say that a pretty good job was done. The Constitution remains one of the best in the world. And the process that was followed, in other words, the whole process of negotiation, serves as a benchmark for many others in conflict situations around the world. I just look at the ongoing requests for advice that we're receiving from such sectors. But the point is, the outcome of that couldn't determine the way in which the country would take care of itself on the way forward. And I think there's a lot of lessons from that time, as I said, that we should take on board now. If we look at the eruption of violence in July in KZN and Gauteng and so on, I'm saying to myself, the peace committees, the local peace committees that followed the National Peace Accord, maybe we should look at reviving something of the same kind of instruments today so that communities can sort out their problems. I think many communities feel left out in this whole process, and that in itself leads to frustration and unrest and unhappiness in general. So the whole idea of having people talking to each other on an intercommunal basis, like we had at that point of time in our history, I think it was a good example.
Yeah. Well, Transformation Initiative Director and former National Party Cabinet Minister Roelf Meyer, I appreciate your time this afternoon.